he was using really interesting terminology for patents that I hadn't thought of before. I mean, he was talking about offense and defense and swords and nuclear weapons and kind of all of the strategy involved. And I was like, that's interesting and really complex and tied to ownership and, kind of really pulling out this conflict between the patent as this kind of legal piece of paper that's giving someone intellectual property, but then also pulling in this idea of the patent as this kind of American ideal of invention and this great symbol and kind of all of the meaning behind it on that side. And I felt like being here in Silicon Valley, where really the topic of that article was the Apple-Samsung series of lawsuits that were going on, that this was kind of the perfect place to pull artists into this discussion and really look at the role of patents in the arts community. Because like a lot of the entrepreneurs and inventors that made Silicon Valley famous, that's what the artistic process really is about. And a lot of these artists are inventing methods and interfaces that have uses beyond the arts and across, other fields. And I feel like that's something that sometimes when I talk about, I'm surprised at how surprised people are with like, artists have patents? Or what are they inventing? And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of pull out and showcase, I guess, 6 stories is really what this exhibition is 6 stories of different artists who have patents for a central method or interface of the artwork on display. And so 4 of the artists are here, back in there. I'd like to welcome them, but we have Maggie Orth, Phil Ross, Scott Snibbe, and Camille Utterback, so welcome. And they'll be here, yay! And they really made this exhibition possible, and they'll be here, and so we're excited after our opening talk for you to be able to explore and experience their work and kind of think a little bit more and kind of launch this dialogue that we really hope will last over the 3 months of the show around these really sticky and complicated issues tied to patents and ownership and the arts. Our opening speaker I'd like to introduce is Michael Naimark. And when I first had the idea of, maybe there could be an exhibition around patents in this way, Michael was the first person that I called. And we had a really interesting Skype conversation and have had a series of them since. So thank you, Michael, for that. But Michael, he's served on the faculty at USC, at NYU's ITP program, at the MIT Media Lab. He was kind of at Interval Research Corporation, which is based here in Silicon Valley from the very beginning, and did a lot of really interesting art and research work there. He's launched companies. He has, I think, 15 patents with 9 additional patents pending. I think I'm right. Close. And has just a really interesting personal story tied to a lot of the issues that we really wanted to explore in this exhibition. He was also an early board member of ZERO1, I'd like to throw in as well. And so I thought he was a perfect person to kind of launch this discussion that we can all have together. And this is really meant to just be the beginning. If you grab one of the brochures, we do have another 3 events that are planned throughout the run of this exhibition that explore other kind of specific avenues tied to patents, the arts, and invention. So welcome. I look forward to having a drink and exploring the exhibition with you later. And with that, I'd like to welcome Michael Naimark.
Thank you. Hi, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to be not that long. It'll be about 30 minutes, just so you know. First, thank you, Joel and the ZERO1 crew for setting up this great show, and particularly Jamie for curating the show. I posted something on Facebook this morning where I called it brilliantly sly and provocative. Brilliantly sly and provocative, and I had to look up the word sly to make sure that it was a good word in this case. I'm also delighted because, if you live long enough, you kind of circulate enough, and every single artist in the show I have some personal or institutional connection with over the years. So Maggie and I are from the same tribe, from the Media Lab. Danny Rosen, ITP, I've been on and off there, including now. He was an Interval Fellow. Camille was an Interval intern, I guess, as was Romy. And Romy I actually had the pleasure of collaborating with as my intern. Scott was also a colleague at Interval. Catherine Richards and I were together in an artist residency at the Banff Center. And Phil was one of my SFAI students, and asked him afterwards about the sawhorse pieces that he did around San Francisco, closing off a bunch of city blocks. So I also want to put my cards on the table. I used to think patents were cool. And when I was in high school, there was an inventor in the Detroit area that got some press, Stan Ovshinsky, and I wrote a letter to him that I'd like to visit, and he was generous enough with his wife Iris, with whom he ran this lab, to give me a tour for no reason at all. He was independent, he was a maverick, renegade, he did things on his own terms. He was a builder, not just a thinker, he got his hands dirty, and he also did quite well. And in one of those odd ways that life works, I probably met Joey Ito's father then. He worked for Stan, Joey Ito now being the current director of the Media Lab. And personally, I didn't know or work with Joey for another 20 years, and that would make sense because I think he was 4 at the time. In 2010, I posted a brief essay on open patent protection, which is very easy to find. It comes up high on Google searches. And saw patents, and still see patents, as a way to support research and academic research, and maybe to make them a little more lightweight, a little more transparent, and frankly, a little less greedy. But the idea here is that rather than approach a Google or Microsoft on your knees looking for money, that maybe something with IP could be created of value for them that they would actually like. But now, and it turns out this is the article that Jamie was referring to, and it's a coincidence, but not really. And the excerpt here, spending by Apple and Google on patent lawsuits and unusually big dollar patent purchases exceeded spending on research and development of new products. And of course it depends, what they're purchasing, but there's something uncomfortably disturbing about this. Now, many of you who know me know that I had a long obsession with trying to understand the dynamics between art and research, and I'll show you some examples that I track. I currently also have a small appointment at MIT, and this is one way of looking at a very long view of art and research at MIT. Jiri Kepish was the first artist. He came over with Moholy-Nagy to form the new Bauhaus to Chicago and was hired as MIT's first art professor, and put on, by all accounts, an extraordinary show called The New Landscape in Art and Science, and a book that came out in 1951. 30 years later, now these quotes are not mine, by the way. These quotes I've pulled in their own words. 30 years later, when the Media Lab formed, Kepish's art center at the time, called the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, now called the Center for Art, Culture, and Technology, CAVS stayed on the other side of campus for 30 years, and very recently they moved in the new expanded Media Lab building. And my inner anthropologist gets really excited about this because they really evolved, and everybody's good there, it's not a question, in 2 very different directions, and it's noteworthy that they're not mutually exclusive. During the interval research period, I had a chance to try to articulate reasons why art could be good for research. Provide stimulation and provocation to our research community, adding meaning, entertainment, and emotional resonance. Acts as magnets to bring together unconventional combinations of skills and talents. Provides content to test tools, and sometimes tools to test content. Provides means for collecting data about human behavior, both through explicit query as well as through observation. Leads researchers down unforeseen paths and result in new discoveries in intellectual property. Serves as forcing functions for decision-making, rigor, and completion through external deadlines and public scrutiny, putting on a show. And 4 of the 7 artists in the show had some interval connection, which is also noteworthy. After interval closed, the Rockefeller Foundation and Leonardo Journal and NYU's ITP were generous enough to support a 1-year effort to try to understand how tech-based art can sustain itself. And I think we didn't come up with any solutions, but we kind of got the map right, that there are several different ways, including the not-for-profit way, the old-fashioned way of selling art, selling PR, selling eyeballs, and this might apply more to institutions than to individuals, selling IP. And remember, musicians sell, copyrights all the time. Selling external services like, day jobs and teaching. And we learned something surprising in the couple years after this report came out, and you can find it on artslab.net. I would poll audiences, which of these 5 do you find the most desirable way personally as an artist to sustain yourself, to support yourself, and which do you find the least desirable way? So that would be 10 questions. And I probably did this a dozen times for audiences like this, many different places, and for each of the 10 questions, at least one person would raise their hand. And to me, there's something amazing about that. And are one of these methods better for artists? And as far as I could tell, the answer is no, and I think this is good news. And is one better in terms of producing artwork? And again, I think the answer is no, and I think that's good news. And this maybe demonstrates that artists have this peculiar survival skills at sort of fitting in however they can. So I'd like to tell 3 personal stories that relate to art and research, credit and ownership, about how innovations move from studio or lab into the real world. And these are all very long stories in terms of duration. So again, being old enough, I can do this, I hope, that we can sort of share some observations. So this, again, was a long time ago, and this is a Super 8 film camera projected through a Super 8 film loop projector with on top of a slowly rotating motor. And of course, the same motor is used to project, and it's just a simple plastic screen. But I hope you can see that because it's synchronized, this very natural spotlight effect happens. And it's sort of retaining the spatiality that film normally loses. A project that happened around the same time, and I'm going to have to put the microphone down here.
I'll get this centered like that.
So this is Nicholas Negroponte taping a Polemus device. It's a position sensor like we have in our phones, but they cost $75,000 back then. And this is like many of you have seen the projected face in the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland. This is like that, but moving. And by the way, Joel Slayton was down the hall working at the time with the late, great Muriel Cooper at the same time.
A belief in human beings and a belief in proper use of technology, which could come together. In a way, I think that's essential to the understanding of what Norbert was all about.
Here's a related project that, kind of had to be done at the same time. It's a 16-millimeter loop projection of a macro-filmed eyeball projected on a hemisphere frosted screen for the same shape. So around this time, after doing the rotating projection, it seemed obvious that the next step would be to control pan and tilt and use it to play back, and the screen would move around. And an easy way to do it was by having a gimbaled mirror that both the camera and projector reflected off of, that you recorded the movement. Everything here is analog. This is Super 8 film. And, at this point, I kind of had to decide, was I interested in building a better, or at least a novel projection system, or just making a useless art project? And in the end, art won. And so this, again, was a long time ago, and the idea was to set up an Americana-style living room. From the center of the room, again, a slowly rotating 16-millimeter camera, after which everything in the room was spray-painted white. And kept in the same position, and the camera was replaced with a projector. And ironically, well, I couldn't paint the people white, so they come off as being very unreal and ghost-like. And the objects, when you project back on, become very lifelike. That's a TV guide. That's how long ago this was. And note the guitar. So 21 years pass, and my friend and colleague Brenda Laurel cajoled me to do this again. This is now in digital video, but it's essentially the same idea. And, you know, ironically, film cameras and projectors have a much more natural symmetry than video cameras and projectors. So on some levels, this was a harder, more challenging project to do. Note the guitar. And again, back years ago, and even not that long ago, big projectors just were in our imaginations. They just didn't exist. And today, it's actually called projection mapping, and it is on buildings. In fact, if anybody hasn't seen the Bot and Dolly video called Box that came out less than a week ago and has over 1 million hits, they call it real-time projection mapping, and it's really quite wonderful. And if you go to the Wikipedia entry, the way they nail the history, I have to say it, I think it's about right. So no patents came out of this, and I'm not sure it would have mattered because it was so long ago in the first place. Here's something that happened not that long ago, and I don't know these people at all. Note the guitar. So I'm never going to do anything better than that, you know. And there are other examples like this. And those of you that saw the Martin Scorsese film on Bob Dylan, in it, Allen Ginsberg says that there's a very famous saying among Tibetan Buddhists: if the student is not better than the teacher, then the teacher is a failure. This picture's 35 years old. Aspen, Colorado, a project called the Aspen Movie Map at MIT. Cameras on top, and that bike wheel on the back of the vehicle is normally down, and it's to trigger the camera to shoot by distance rather than time. And it's basically the predecessor of Google Street View today. Here's a demo, very short demo. So the fifth wheel allowed this kind of boom, boom, boom looking. We shot one frame every 10 feet. We had to film going through every intersection, every possible way, even though we did use 4 cameras for a panoramic effect. And the trick was getting the match cuts right, just like that, going from straight to turn to straight sequence. And again, all analog had to be done in film, had to be transferred to analog laserdisc and then controlled by a digital computer, but it was not a very powerful one. And maybe more than anyone else, I kept at it for a bunch of years. So here's a project for the Exploratorium, shot from a helicopter over a 10 by 10 mile grid centered on the Golden Gate Bridge. And the intention here was to give a tight linked feeling, like you were controlling the footage in a very, very tight way. not so much simulating a helicopter as much as giving a hyperreal experience, feeling like you're Superman or Superwoman. And we got a patent for that. This idea of tightly linking was something that with software guru Ken Carson, who's now at Apple. And it turns out that our business partner used this indirectly to make a great deal of money only a few years ago, and it's not a pretty story. You can Google Patent Harbor and learn about that if you'd like. Later, Karlsruhe, Germany, home of the Center for Arts and Media. They have a tram system they're very proud of. We interfaced a camera, again, to have it distance triggered. This was also an opportunity to use an orthoscopically correct screen. That is a big screen with the same field of view as the taking lens, and that really helped make it feel like a window. And we didn't apply for patents on this. This was in Germany. It's an art project. The You Are Here map, and because of the shooting from a rail, this unrivaled, almost computer graphics look occurs. But it was big, but 2D, not 3D. And then at Interval, a few years later, had an opportunity to do a stereoscopic version with 2 cameras. Again, we had to do it at film back then. And this was at the Banff Center. For a bunch of reasons, we built it to look like a kinetoscope. We needed an eye hood for the 3D, and we needed a crank. And again, having that tight-linked feeling like the Golden Gate trackball, that when you turn the crank, it feels like you're moving film inside, and it feels good, like a steering wheel on a car. You can't have lag for that to happen. And oddly, because it was analog laser discs, you can move really much quicker than you can, say, on Street View today. So at Interval, we got a patent on the crank, on this tight linkage, because there's a force feedback, a haptic brake, basically, on the crank. And the funny thing is, when you turn it and you come to the beginning or end of a sequence, the brake locks up and it stops. And if you don't have a brake there, it feels wrong. You know, it feels like, you know, you're turning it and the image goes black and you're turning, and when you have the brake, it just feels totally natural. This was highly collaborative. There were 6 inventors listed on the patent: Bob Adams, Bob Elkire, Christoph Dorman, David Gessel, Steve Saunders, and myself. And whatever came out of that is not entirely clear, except it led to some, in some cases, much more interesting research done by Scott Snibbe and a team of people at Interval. It also led to some footage, some grist for the research mill. Harlan Baker and John Woodfill are Silicon Valley computer vision gurus. Paul DeBevec is now at USC. Leo Villarreal is the artist who did the Bay Bridge. They were interns at the time. And this is deriving very early examples of deriving 3D from depth, from 2 images, from stereoscopy. Here's a related project. Timbuktu, Mali, 2 35mm motion picture cameras, again, 2 for stereo, rotating like the old work. And the idea was to make an immersive installation that came as close as we reasonably could to feeling like being there. The idea is to have it orthoscopically correct, stereoscopic, and to have the image appear to be moving around you. And this was shot with UNESCO at 4 endangered World Heritage Sites. This is Dubrovnik, where they still had the Orlando column covered because there was still bombing going on at the time. And the idea was to plop down a tripod, not move it through the course of a day, and shoot different times of day so that they could be intercut and get the same kind of match cuts that you would get in Aspen, but temporally. And what I'm not telling you is that the way the image rotates around the audience is by rotating the audience on a 16-foot diameter rotating platform. And you've all had the experience of being on a train in the station, and the train next to you pulls out, and you can swear you're moving. This was a lot like this, and the installation normally is covered, curtained all the way around. So you go on the slowly moving floor, and the image is rotating around, rotating still in sync. It really feels like it's going around you. And we got a patent for that, and that was with Lee Felsenstein, also at Interval. And, this is the sort of thing that the only potential licensees or buyers of a patent would be Disney, and that's fine by us. It took about a dozen years before 3D television came out, and that gave us an opportunity at USC in 2008 to stagger the footage and kind of get something for nothing here. So the footage represents a 60-degree horizontal field of view, so in 20 seconds to go across, so you stagger it 20 seconds, and you have a fairly cheap 180-degree 3D half hexagon. Google's Liquid Galaxy, again, the idea of putting screens together to achieve immersion is not new and still interesting. And here's from the Computer History Museum's website from a show that might still be up. It came out last year. And they got Aspen in here. They got a lot of other important predecessors going back quite far, but they included Aspen. They also included Banff. So at least we feel kind of part of the lineage. A related project began in 2006, received Google support in 2007, and at USC, and again, a highly collaborative project, names that many of you will recognize from being in the arts community. A wonderful team, and the idea, while everybody else was working on using photos to make 3D models, we said, everybody's doing that. We don't need to do that. We want to take your photos, however dorky and personal they are, and situate them in a 3D computer model so that they appear perfectly aligned. And our secret was a little bit of human help, and I'll just play a little bit of the demo tape. So I hope you can see that by spatializing these images, something magic happens that's different than just putting them like a push pin, like geotagged footage on a map. And of course, we could also do historic photos this way. So USC was granted a couple patents just last year on this. We're happy the project's still moving along. And again, hopefully as an experiment, this could contribute to be a way, a means to fund research. And again, I want to emphasize that we were interested in your photos, not neutral photos that help contribute to building a model, but just Flickr, Instagram, Facebook-style photos. Like this. Okay, so the third and final little story deals with liveness. And, liveness really is a new concept. I mean, in the big scheme of things, that Abraham in Canaan may have imagined his family back in Ur, and Queen Isabella in Spain may have wondered what Columbus was up to in the New World, and Napoleon in Egypt may have thought, what's Josephine having for breakfast in Paris, but not the way we do. It really requires electronics for this notion of spontaneity to happen. And when you think about the question, what's live now? It's pretty intriguing, especially, in a world where there are, a billion or more of these. So in 1998, I was cheerleading a project at Interval to find live events on video as they happen. And video back then was tethered boxes. There were tethered boxes connected to the Ethernet. Most of the time, nothing happened. And we survived Interval's closing. We did a startup. These are some of the original pages. The startup was for art, for research, and for business. We did file for 3 patents. And this was another great team. I'm honored to have been involved. Emily Whale and Ignacio Moresco, also from NYU ITP. Ignacio's around here at Ericsson now. Software whiz Baldo Faeta at Adobe now. Aviv Bergman, who's now the founding director of systems and computational biology at Einstein College in New York City. And after Interval closed, we were up and running for about a year. And it was based around what we called a Hot Now button, that when you saw something of interest, you could press it. It would go to other people. We had a Hot Now list that updated every 10 seconds, which at the time was unheard of. And our joke is that this was very Warhol. And I fought like hell for a particular CEO, Stephen DeBerry. My business card read Instigator, and I really wanted to, in my own small way, demonstrate that artists can collaborate without totally being pulled in as entrepreneurs. And just kind of on side note, the core team of Kundi, which is Swahili for flocking, swarming, and herding, the core team of 7 people, 4 were African American, and that was also unheard of in Silicon Valley and San Francisco at the time. So again, honored and proud to have been part of this. Kundi lasted a year, died with a bubble bursting. 10 years pass. Apple comes out with the iPhone 4 and FaceTime, and several of us get back together and say, surf's up. This is what we've been waiting for, that live video is not webcams, it's little television transmitters that we all have in our pocket. So I'll just play a couple seconds of this. This is from the last May Day protest, which is now a little over a year ago, Wall Street, shooting, which we can do now with our smartphones. And it's only going to get better. Ergonomically, it's really hard to walk around and use, a little phone as a camera. Google Glass is something very interesting to watch. And perhaps more than anything else, when one is webcasting mobile live, we just miss feedback. The more feedback, the better that we could possibly do. So here's where we're currently on this. If you imagine this to be live webcasting and this to be live video matching like chat roulette or airtime, to combine the two so that you have an intermediary, perhaps somebody at home or at work, on call to help get your web video out. A single camera scenario, which would be a little bit like the movie The Matrix, where you pull out your camera and you instantly hear somebody saying, operator, can I help you? Multiple camera scenarios where the intermediary operators can connect and coordinate. Webcasters could be on call. They get a beep in their pocket, and very real-time emergent communities, hopefully we think can form. And USC was granted 2 patents last year on this as well. So again, I'm thrilled if this can help support research and if we can get the project done at the same time. But something happened when we began, literally at the exact same time in 2010, like the same month, if not the same week. So many of you know about this lawsuit. Paul Allen took 4 of the patents from the several hundred from Interval and sued everybody: Apple, Facebook, Google, Yahoo, AOL. And of the 4 patents, the original alert patent is one that he's asserted against all of these companies, including Facebook, for the like button. And, we've been the butt of a lot of snarky jokes about whether or not we invented the like button or not. And of course, it's a really complicated question. It's also not particularly uncanny that we decided the surf was up and time to do this project when Paul Allen and company decided to sue, because we were looking 10 years out and 10 years had passed. It's looking like a multi-billion-dollar proposition. And I'm going a couple minutes over what I expected. I hope that's okay. But I want to point out that the lead on the other 3 patents, for the most part, was a colleague, Paul Freiberger, who you would know as an author who wrote Fire in the Valley, which became the basis for the biopic Pirates of Silicon Valley, which was the predecessor for The Social Network. And Paul and I were some of the earliest hires at Interval, and I was hired essentially as an artist, and he was hired as a writer. And I'm sure that, you know, there was a certain skepticism for bringing non-engineer types into a research lab like this. And it's kind of significant that 10 years later, perhaps, this sort of looser creativity may have led to what some people think is a great deal of value. I posted a public statement. It was vetted both by a commercial lawyer and a lawyer from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I have no financial interest in the outcome, but I do want to point out that it could be hugely significant if all parties commit to something good for the creative community as an outcome. So if you know anybody at any of these companies, please spread the word. So it's really hard to know how this is going to play out. There's a lot at stake. There's probably been tens of millions of dollars already spent on the legal side. And I don't know what's next. A senior lawyer who used to do litigation not long ago told me, he said, we have a joke about people like you. The only good inventor is a dead inventor. And you know, it's a joke, but it also means that we, the creative community, actually matter, you know, in a funny way. I have no proposals, answers, or solutions, except it seems important that as a community, we need to not be dead and to pay attention, and maybe we can have some positive impact. So this show is a good move in that direction. Thank you.